Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. World leaders are gathered in Munich for a three-day security conference which started on Friday. Amongst the many topics on the agenda are the future of Ukraine, including the possibility of international peacekeeping forces on the ground and controlling the borders of Europe to prevent mass illegal migration. A lot to cover in 3 days. What can we realistically expect to transpire? Well, to talk us through this, we're joined by Elisabeth Braw, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and a regular contributor. Elisabeth, good to see you. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be with you again.
Thank you. So, key things that have struck you since the beginning of this conference.
Well, the thing that really stood out was J.D. Vance's speech to the audience, which was expected to be about Ukraine and how to get the war to end, and instead he launched a 20-minute verbal attack on the European Union, and I don't think I haven't attended the Munich Security Conference for all the 61 years I has been in operation, but I'm sure that this was a pretty unique moment, in fact, a unique moment in the history of the Munich Security Conference. That sort of a broadside by the most important Western country in this Western family of nations, and who knows what the fallout will be. But it was clearly planned to be offensive, or from J.D. Vance's perspective, perhaps one would say he wanted to speak truth to the European leaders gathered. But either way, there will be a fallout from this. And unfortunately, Ukraine has become almost an afterthought in this context.
Well, certainly from Vance's speech, one would assume so. Although Pete Hegseth said some somewhat disruptive comments, and we'll come to those in just a second. Tell me, what do you think was behind J.D. Vance's speech? Why pick on this topic? I mean, the only connection I can see to security is, uncontrolled illegal migration into Europe, and that, of course, is a security threat potentially. What else might be the motivation for that speech?
Well, I think the most benign interpretation one could give the speech is that it was not directed at the Munich Security Conference audience at all, but or indeed to a wider European audience at all, but instead it was directed at a domestic audience back home in the United States. I think that is the most benign interpretation one can give it. But then why travel to Munich to speak to Americans at home? Unfortunately, this U.S. administration seems in some ways consumed by the idea that the EU in particular is some sort of foe or something that needs to be corrected. And what I think is mistaken in that analysis is that they view the European Union as a sort of a monolith, when in fact, as you well know, and as your viewers well know, it's a collection of 27 countries with very different political cultures, and yes, agreements painstakingly achieved in the areas of monetary policy, trade, and a few other areas, including the environment and agriculture.
Understood. Now, there seem to be a number of mixed messages coming from the US delegation. Let's talk about, for example, membership for NATO. Of membership to NATO for Ukraine. Pete Hegseth initially ruled it out, and then he walked it back after J.D. Vance said, well, nothing was off the table. What do you think, this is all about? Are they really as disunited as it may seem, or is this part of some kind of negotiating stance?
I think this is the result of this administration being particularly top-heavy, as in the top person setting the policy. Even if you are the vice president, even if you're the secretary of state, even if you're the secretary of defense, you don't have the sort of independent power base, or indeed power, where you could volunteer, offer an opinion of your own. They need to check everything with Donald Trump, and on this occasion, it seems they may not have cleared their talking points with him before coming to Munich. Now, this is not unique to Donald Trump. There have been other presidents that have essentially set the entire policy and had a pretty weak cabinet members. But then if you think of somebody like Henry Kissinger, who very much was the man who formulated U.S. foreign policy and security policy in coordination with Richard Nixon, I think that's something that we don't have at the moment.
No, certainly not. Now, with all of this going on in Munich, I mean, clearly Putin is watching carefully and presumably planning out some kind of negotiating tactic or approach. Now, teams from Ukraine and Russia are supposed to be getting around the table. What do you think is going to happen in that engagement? And should the US be directly involved, and should the European Union be directly involved in those conversations?
The US has already staked out a position for itself in those talks. And what's more, Keith Kellogg, who is the retired US general who's advising Trump and being his messenger to Ukraine, he said just today that there is no place for the European Union in these talks. So presumably it will be the United States, Russia and Ukraine, and it would be massively regrettable if the European Union were not given a place. But apparently the Americans have made their minds up that that's not going to be the case. Now, one would also think that Ukraine would have a voice in the matter, but I think, unfortunately, Ukraine can't dictate anything at this point. So it looks like a not particularly positive situation for Ukraine. And it's also regrettable from the point of view that the European Union, as your viewers well know, is already a key supporter and helper of Ukraine, not just when it comes to military support, not just when it comes to diplomatic support, but in having given and continuing to give refuge to millions of Ukrainian refugees, Poland being the leader in that activity. And that, one would think, would give the EU a voice in the matter of how this war ends and what happens after that.
Indeed, and again, we wait to see if that is going to be walked back or not. Now, I want to move on to peacekeeping troops in Ukraine. Now, this has been something that's been discussed since the start of the war, since the start of the full-scale invasion, at least. And President Donald Trump has addressed it, and he says, well, there are not going to be any American boots on the ground there, but there should be some European and non-European soldiers, perhaps, in a peacekeeping role. On top of all of that, there is talk about a European military formation starting to take shape. Two questions, really. Do you expect a peacekeeping mission to take place in Ukraine? And if so, what would they be composed of?
There will need to be some sort of peacekeeping formation. I hesitate to predict it will be only European, simply because it would be extremely risky for European countries to be solely responsible for a peacekeeping force. It would practically be an invitation to Putin to attack some of those peacekeepers, and then these European countries would either have to back down because it would be too risky to escalate, or they would have to avenge that attack, and then Europe would be in a war with Russia. So I think what European leaders will probably insist on is a peacekeeping force that consists interests not only of Europeans, but Europeans serving together with soldiers from other countries. And we should remember there are many countries outside Europe that have very able militaries. For example, if we look at China, if we look at India, if we look at a number of other countries, there is a role for them to play there, and it's frankly in their interest to contribute to peace and stability in the region.
Well, it sounds, Elizabeth, as though, this would be the ideal role for a United Nations peacekeeping force. But, of course, that's being prevented by Russia being on the Security Council. They keep vetoing any attempt to do this. Does that make sense to you?
Russia long ago ceased to be a productive and collaborative member of the international community of nations, and that is extremely regrettable. And I hesitate to say anything positive about the Soviet Union, but even the Soviets tried to be seen as a respectable country, and that meant that they participated in various international undertakings. They signed various international treaties simply because it would have been too embarrassing and too much of a blow to their prestige and the country's prestige and reputation if they didn't. Russia doesn't care, and that makes Russia a very dangerous country to deal with.
Yes, so it looks as though the United Nations' hands are completely tied. I suppose what that potentially leaves is the possibility that US troops may form part of the peacekeeping force, if only to protect access to the rare earth minerals that President Trump wants quite badly. Is that a possibility, do you think?
If that deal comes to pass, it would be a very sad day for the rules-based international order. The rules-based international order, and indeed the United Nations Charter, are, as your viewers well know, based on the idea that any country that attacks another country should be punished, or rather that the attacked country will receive aid from other countries in order to defend itself. And for President Trump to suggest quite openly that the United States will only help Ukraine if Ukraine promises to give America some of its most prized natural resources. It's I think embarrassing, but it's also hugely damaging for the future of the rules-based international order, because then in future that would mean that any country having the misfortune of being attacked would then have to face a reality where any country that might be willing to help it would say, well, in exchange, I want your oil, I want your minerals, I want this, I want that. What an incredibly sad day that would be for the world order.
Well, certainly it would seem that way, although President Zelensky did offer this to President Biden as well. It was just never taken up by him. Elizabeth Braw, thank you very much indeed for sharing your analysis with our audience. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.